Hey guys, welcome to Politically Provoked, an interactive podcast where we host debates, panels, and interviews. If this is your first time joining us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell to keep up to date with all our future debates and panels. We are primarily on YouTube, but you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Discord, BitChute, TikTok, and Instagram. All the information is in the banner below. We also have a link tree you can find in the description, or you can just search Politically Provoked and we should pop right up. Politically Provoked is a neutral ground where people from across the political spectrum can either duke it out in a debate or just have a casual discussion in one of our panels. Either way, we try to represent both left and right-wing views on every episode. I'm your left-wing host, Brittany, and this is your right-wing host, Todd. Hi, Todd.
Doing good, dog.
we got the dogs barking. They're excited. They're ready for this debate. All right. So yeah, we have a very fun debate for you guys. Two people that were on our panel last Friday, and I guess they're gonna be picking up where they left off as they were having a lot of back and forth, and so we decided they needed to have a debate, just the two of them. So they are going to be debating systemic racism. I know they were getting into some conflicts about a few other things with abortion and stuff like that. So I don't know if they're going to tie that in. They might, but we just went with systemic racism as the topic. But, you know, never know where the topics can lead us. So let's bring on our guests. So first up, let's bring on Annihilus. How are you tonight?
I am. How are you?
Doing good. Yeah, so you know the drill. You want to introduce yourself, tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
I am a nihilist. I am on YouTube primarily, and I have a basically inactive Twitter. I make dirtbag leftist content of ever decreasing quality. So go subscribe there, I guess.
Okay. All right. So next up, let's bring on DeAndre. How are you tonight?
Well, a little grumpy. I haven't had my nap.
Yeah, he didn't get his nap. So Annihilus, he's gonna take it out on you, I guess. Yeah, if you want to introduce yourself, tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
DeAndre. Most people call me King Golden, but on the political aisle, I'm on. I wouldn't say I'm on the right. I'm a constitutionalist strictly. There's a lot of noise in the background. Sorry. It took me quite a while to find a good place to sit at so that I wouldn't have to deal with those type of interruptions. And then they followed me anyway. But you can find me on Facebook, or I don't really use YouTube as much as I should, but I have one. I don't use Twitter, so just Facebook or Discord.
Yeah, and I do have both of our guest links in the description. So if you guys want to check them out, you can go there and find whatever they gave me. All right, so here is what we are going to do. We are going to, each person can give an opening statement, can be as little as 1 minute, no longer than 5. I don't think either of you guys really have something prepared, so I'm guessing it's going to be closer to the 1 minute range. About the topic, what your stance is. After that, we will open up the floor. At the end of the debate, we will go into the Q&A. If you guys have any questions, tag Politically Provoked who your question is addressed to, and we should be able to get to them all. After the Q&A, we'll go into closing statements and final thoughts. So I guess, Annihilus, why don't you get us started?
All right, so I'm full of surprises, of course, because I lied. I did prepare an opening statement. I just didn't want to go first, but I'm here anyway. So
Oh my God.
I've always disliked those people who conservatives like to call SJWs. You know, those people who blather on about how 2 + 2 or white people wearing dreadlocks are white supremacists. I don't like those people. But that won't stop me from recognizing the obvious fact that even accounting for poverty, crime rates, vague notions of cultural decay, and everything else in America, there are still many ways people of all races are systemically disadvantaged in unique ways. These disadvantages tend to hit people of color the hardest. For example, the drug war was created in part to imprison Black people. It and the prison industrial complex continue to devastate African American communities. Black and Hispanic drivers are searched by police more often than whites, but this disparity decreases after sunset when darkness masks one's race. Black offenders receive harsher sentences for the same crimes. Police militarization is higher in Black communities, even accounting for crime rates. Black patients are perceived to feel less pain than white patients, leading to worse treatments, and they're often underrepresented in medical studies. Minorities still experience housing and lending discrimination. I've only listed here some of the cases with the absolute least ambiguity, whether there or not there are racist elements in these systems, but that should be enough to go on for quite a while.
All right, thank you. So DeAndre.
It's quite a lot of mouthful there. Um, I don't particularly have an opening statement to say, but I have written on this particular topic enough to not need one. Starting out, uh, it is my opinion that there is no such thing as systemic racism within America. You need not look any further than the simple fact of the matter that for the last, well, minus the last 4 years, for the 8 years previous to the last 4 years, we had a black president. Now, roughly 60, 50 years ago, it was Martin Luther King who had said himself that he thought that with the compliance to the Civil Rights Act and affirmative action bills that were passed, that he could have seen a Negro president within 40 to 20, 25 to 40 years, and that would be the pinnacle of integration within society. And we've had that. We've had more than that, actually. We've had multiple blacks that have been owners of top ranking businesses, multiple black billionaires, multiple blacks that are in top of the positions in politics and the local governments and the police stations, the police departments, and things like that. So my position will be to try to bring clarity, or at least try to dispel the idea that there is some system that is oppressing blacks within this country, because as far as I can see, out with the laws in the books right now, the oppression is on the other side.
All right, so I guess we can open up the floor.
Okay, so what you started out with was that one of our 45 presidents so far has been half black, and that's your evidence that there is no systemic racism in the entire country?
Oh, the evidence that there's no systemic racism in the entire country, you need not look further than that. That is the pinnacle of integration within our society. Now, you can go beyond that. You can look at it within the country right now, that if you go to the major massive cities within the United States, the majority, all of it, run by blacks. You go to Atlanta, massive, massive city. As a matter of fact, the Atlanta, Georgia airport is the largest, or well, actually the most used airport within the United States. That's run by a black mayor. The local representation there is run by blacks. The police departments, blacks. You go to most of the major cities, they're run by blacks. You take a look at the entertainment industry, you look at the housing industry, they're filled with black millionaires and billionaires. So Barack Obama being the president of the United States is the top that any black person could ever reach within the country. But that's not to say that that's the only thing that blacks have been able to accomplish, particularly if you go back even further than that. Blacks were breaking records and setting examples throughout the entirety of the middle of this of the civil rights. Even before that, where you had black people being the first ones to successfully conduct open heart surgery, where black people had created or invented the modern usage of paper, the modern usage of the press machine, the modern usage of the washing machine, all things which were invented or at least patented by someone who was black. So we've been making groundbreaking leaps for centuries in the country. And that was even when slavery was still a part of the thing, where we were still making lots of major breakthroughs even during that. A lot of those things were taken as credit by the white slave owners, but a lot of those differences of things were still done by black people.
Yeah, so didn't you just contradict yourself then? You're talking about how all these successes by black people means there is no systemic racism, and then you list out some accomplishments by black people while slavery was still legal. Doesn't that just
But
contradict your own argument?
the majority of the ones that I listed were actually during the 60s and 50s. So slavery was long gone by then.
Oh yeah, and racism was long gone by then too, right?
Well, if you're going to go by that token, during the 60s and 70s, well, 60s, 50s, the 40s and 30s and 20s, black people, even while under Jim Crow down here in the South, were significantly better off than they are today. As under Jim Crow and 150 years of slavery prior, not black people were in a better financial position then, coming out of slavery and Jim Crow, than we are right now. We were mostly in the middle class back in the 50s and 60s up until the affirmative action and the welfare state kicked in. And one generation of the welfare state completely destroyed the entire black structure than Jim Crow and 150 years of slavery prior. We were, as a matter of fact, during the 20s, when the first major uh, minimum wage came around, that was a minimum wage that was put into place simply to restrict blacks, because blacks, particularly young black boys, teenage age black boys, were out earning young white teenage boys at the same job and same field because they were more hireable then. So they were out earning them. So they had to implement a minimum wage in order to encourage white employees to hire only white employers. White employers to hire only white employees. So just going by that historical data, black people were better off then than we are now. And that's just on an economic system. Now, right now, after the civil rights, there's nothing that's stopping black people right now.
Okay, so I noticed you already pivoted off the point. You're talking about the economic prospects of black people, even though, I mean, you're talking about how black people were supposedly better off back then, but there was literally racism written into the laws, like explicit racism. So even back then, when blacks were apparently better off, there was also racism. So now that black people are supposedly worse off, there's not racism? Is that your argument now?
My argument hasn't been that because there's no racism, or there's going to be racism no matter what century you live in. It's not going to be part of the system. My argument was that back then, before the affirmative action and welfare state kicked in, black people were significantly better. It doesn't mean that back then we're better culturally and that we're better civilly. Today, we are far worse off economically, but we are much better when it comes to rights within the country. As a matter of fact, black people have an abundance of rights in this country, an abundance of privileges in this country that no other race in this country has, simply for the fact of being black. Affirmative action pretty much guarantees that you can get away with a lot of shit just because of the color of your skin and that it's black.
So I don't like affirmative action. In fact, I would say that if you stretch your definitions, you could actually fit affirmative action into the definition of systemic reverse racism, I guess.
Reverse
But then
racism
that would
doesn't
mean
exist.
I know it's technically it's just racism, but I'm just using it as a modifier. But yeah, just to clarify, I'm not particularly fond of affirmative action. So you're saying that can you repeat most of can you just summarize, because you went
Oh,
on for a while?
what I said
Yeah, let's
was
try to keep it a little bit briefer so we have more back and forth.
what I said was if back then, economically, black people were far much better off. As today, we may not be better off financially as a whole, but we are better off when it comes to rights and privileges.
Okay, so what evidence do you have that black people were better off economically?
Well, if you go back economically, and this is going back there in the generations of Jim Crow and slavery, they never deteriorated the respect of blacks nor black peoples, and black people worked in an overwhelming majority
What?
of the
Wait,
labor
wait, wait,
market
wait,
then.
wait. Black people did not have their respect deteriorated? Have you even like seen those basic
I didn't.
pictures
I
of
said I'm talking about their respect and work, the deterioration of their work, deterioration of family values, deterioration of things that actually cause an increase in economy. When you have a family structure where you have those types of things or types of values, income is generally much better in those types of environments than you do with the scattered family system that we have right now, where you can't get a leg up or a head up because you don't have the opportunity to actually work those extra hours because you are a single parent with children at home. You don't have the opportunity or the time or the education to take up any of those things.
Yeah, I mean, there
That's
seems to be a good solution to those, though, right? If there's too many children
good. Yes, there's a good solution
children
to
of
it.
single
It's to
mothers, and
wait
there's too
till
many people being uneducated, then we can
yeah.
increase access to abortion so that people
No,
don't get burdened down by that, and then we can increase education funding and social
no, not at
programs
all. Those
meant to
those are
keep
the
Black
worst
people
solutions.
in their schools.
Those are the worst solutions because, and I'll tell you why. The worst solutions because after the end of slavery, during that particular time between the the 1860s and the early 1920s, the gap in education between blacks and whites was about 4 or 5 years, whereas a black person had an education of a third grader, a white person had the education of an eighth grader. Within that 55 to 45 year period of time where you have people like George Washington Carver and a couple of others, along with a few whites from the North that set up with the NAACP, and they donated a lot of money to create these historically black colleges as we know them today, they managed to decrease the sorry about that. They managed to decrease the education gap between whites and blacks in just a few months within the span of maybe 50 years. The education isn't a problem. The problem that we have right now is in the black family, there's not a lot of structure, and there's not any school choice. You know, back then you had a choice of where you could send your kids to school. If you could afford to get them there,
Wait,
you could
what?
do that.
Didn't they literally have to like force busing to integrate people? Weren't they all segregated back
But
then? I'm not sure there was
segregation
really much school choice. Pretty sure it was the
Segregation was
shitty stuff
part
for
of
Black
school choice.
people.
If you could go to whatever school that you could afford to go to, you could go to it. We didn't have a generalized system the way that we have right now. We didn't start getting this type of system until
So you're
around
saying the school choice that
30s and
allowed Black
40s.
people to go to segregated,
We had a
worse
lot
Black
more
schools
school choice then.
increased Black prosperity? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't compute.
Well, I'm sorry, but the data is right there. If you have education gap decreasing from a 4 or 5 year period to only a few months between in 50 years, that's the education was never an issue. The issue was always getting there and discipline of keeping people actually involved in those types of things.
But you're talking
Abortion,
about the
and the,
education gap, but that's evidence for my position that there is still systemic racism.
there is no systemic racism in the education
So
sector right
so
now.
what's causing Black people
What's
just
called
to be uneducated?
What's causing black people to be uneducated? I'll tell you. What causes them to be uneducated in the black communities right now is a lack of care. You have single parents that aren't there to enforce discipline of their children to make sure that they're doing their lesson, to make sure that they're following their things. And then when they get home, they don't if there's nobody there to tell them what to do, to tell them to do their homework, unless they really care about their education, they're not going to do that.
You're vaguely gesturing at some
It's
sort
not
of
going to do
cultural
they're not
element. I
gonna
mean,
do it.
most Black fathers actually live with their kids. 60% of Black fathers
Most black
officially live
fathers
with
do
their
not
kids,
live with
and
their
many,
kids.
many other. Okay, so 60% of Black fathers officially live with their kids, and many other fathers live separately but near their kids. Black fatherlessness is a problem, but it's way overstated. And of course, we could
It is
really
the
help.
majority
We
of the
could
problem,
really,
Wait,
we
but
could
let him
really
finish.
help
Let him finish, and then go. Okay,
and
sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
we could really help get more Black fathers in homes if we stopped locking them up for petty crimes like dealing drugs and shit like that. Wouldn't you think? I mean, that can lead us into the ways the criminal justice system has treated Black people.
not at all. I don't think so at all. I think incentivizing more black people to commit more crimes and to start using more drugs is a horrible idea. I think
Wait. Who
I
says
I
I'm not
I don't think that
incentivizing
the
people
Wait,
to?
yeah, now let DeAndre finish. Go ahead.
I don't think that the current laws on the books, as it relates to the war on drugs, what that was placed in 1994, helps at all because of the disparity that it has, where there's like a 77-to-1 ratio for crack versus cocaine, just because of the difference of users. I don't think that helps at all. But I don't think that changing the law to not put people in jail for uses of drugs, illegal drugs, mind you. If it's legal, it's a different story altogether. And then even then, when it's legal, abuse of it is still not something that I would recommend, especially if you're trying to encourage a proper upbringing of children. You don't want them to be growing up in an environment that's full of drug abusers. I don't think that helps them at all. I think that
Yeah.
that
Yeah, let's
does
get
that is an issue with the petty crime stuff. I think that is an issue, but I don't think that's discriminating against Black people.
Well, I mean, you have this famous quote by John Ehrlichman, which basically said, what was it? That did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. I mean, John Ehrlichman, who was advisor to Richard Nixon, he admitted that he created the drug war in order to imprison Black people. And like, they're only crimes because we made them illegal. There's nothing inherently wrong about consuming a few drugs on the way. I mean, most people are not drug abusers. Most people just consume some just in their everyday life. These are people who are not harming other people, and yet they're being locked up into these prison industrial complexes, and where the prisons just drain all our money away to do nothing and keep otherwise productive members of our society out of our economy.
I have never met a drug user that was a productive member of my society. If you take a look at a lot of these people that have been put away, some of them are put away for something as little as marijuana usage, which marijuana, a whole other thing that I absolutely hate it, unless for medicinal purposes. But uh, some people get put away for things like that, and they get put away for a long time, eh, some of the sentencing doesn't make any sense. A lot of them doesn't make any sense. But the problem is that to have all of these drugs in the community, it's not helping anybody. It's not helping the children. It's not
Do you have
helping the
evidence the
community.
war on drugs reduces drug usage? Because we've been doing it for years and years, and it doesn't seem to have worked. I mean, we tried it with prohibition too, and we had to repeal that shit because all we got was the mafia, right? The mafia, because all the wine and shit was illegal, so we got the mafia like smuggling it around and creating crime. And of course, now we have the similar stuff where we have marijuana and we have we have like cocaine, and we have these drug gangs, and they're going on and creating black on black violence. I mean, gang violence, which is the
Drugs do
majority of
not create
gun
black on
deaths.
black violence. Drugs don't create black on black violence. Drugs don't create gang violence. What creates those types of things are the people that participate in it. To try to
And why do they
blame
participate in it? Is it is it possibly because they're very poor and they have to in order to make a living? Is it possible that it's because we don't pay people a living wage, so they have to resort to
not at
illicit
all.
means to make a living?
Well, not at all. We did not have this problem in our communities decades ago. This only happened as a result of the welfare state destroying the family structure.
No, it happened because of the war on drugs. We tried it with
The war
prohibition
on
earlier
drugs and
too, and we had the
welfare
mafia. This is not new.
completely correlate. The welfare state, at the same time that the welfare state came in, the Black fathers were removed from the household, largely in part due to a lot of the criminalization, which that was a problem. It does not
Okay, yeah, so
mean
you admit there is systemic racism.
no, not at all. Because the reason why I don't admit that there's systemic racism in that type of system for drug crimes, it's because nobody tells a Black person to use fucking drugs. That's completely their choice, and they
Yes,
know the
it should be
consequences
completely
of
their
their
choice. It's
choice.
completely harmless, especially marijuana. Marijuana doesn't even kill people. It's
Marijuana
almost
isn't
impossible to
harmless.
overdose from marijuana.
A lot of
People,
people, a lot of people
we
continue
just
to
lock people up for dealing marijuana
those
for
types of
political
assumptions.
purposes. I mean,
Marijuana
Nixon's advisor
isn't harmless.
admitted it. He admitted
No,
that he did the
there
law
are
to be
no
racist.
drugs. There are no drugs that are harmless. Caffeine is a drug, and it's not harmless. When abused, it is dangerous.
Okay,
Same thing
so
with
do you think
tobacco.
we should? Do you think we should illegalize caffeine or sugar?
No, not at all.
Okay,
These
because caffeine and sugar
caffeine and
are in many
sugar,
ways more harmful than marijuana.
caffeine and sugar do not alter one's perception of time. They do not alter one's perception of distance. They do not cloud someone's judgment the way
Sugar makes
marijuana
people
does.
fat. Sugar makes people fat and it kills people,
Choice just
and
makes people
marijuana does
fat.
not.
Sugar doesn't make people fat. There's sugar in just about everything that you consume. What makes
Yes,
you fat
if
is
you
your
haven't noticed, we are very
overindulgence.
fat in America.
Yes, because we are very affluent. We have the luxury to do that in America. No other country in the world. See, here's the problem that people seem to have when they try to compare American culture to other culture. America is not the standard. We are the exception. For the majority of human history in this existence that we have been here, the entire world has been in poverty. America stands alone as the example. That's the reason why you had presidents like William Howard Taft, and you had presidents like Grover Cleveland and Polk that were morbidly obese, was because during that time period, if you were fat, that showed that you had money. America had the luxury to
Yeah,
be able to
you were
do that.
money. You had money, and you were white, which is why it was harder to legalize those things. You're right.
No
So
one's
that's
going to
evidence for my position again.
legalize food. The only food items that I have seen that have been illegalized, or at least the FDA has not cleared for use in a long time, has been things like lard, which which completely block the arteries out in such a horrible way. Now, you could say the same thing for a lot of other things, because when you look at certain types of vegetables, particularly the ones that are more green, like broccoli, greens, and spinach, and things like that, the amount of cellulose in them, if we don't have any regulation with what we eat and how we eat and have enough fiber in our system, our bodies cannot break down cellulose. You'll have blood clots and you'll die from eating spinach and greens as your only form of food, simply because our bodies are not designed to break down cellulose, and it causes blood clots. Doesn't mean that you go and legalize those types of things. Those types of things don't have any change on your mindset the way drugs do. Alcohol,
Didn't you say?
prohibition,
Didn't you say you were a
prohibition.
constitutionalist and you liked
Yes,
personal responsibility? Well, what happened
yes.
to all of that? I mean, it just seems to
This
me like
is
the
all
drug
of
war
that
just
personal responsibility.
personal responsibility, but also you're gonna have the state regulate what people put in their
If
own bodies. I
When
mean,
it comes to drugs, absolutely.
it doesn't even
Because
reduce
you
drug
are reducing
overdoses.
the chance of somebody else being killed because of your reckless actions.
No,
If
you're
you can't take
increasing the chance
responsibility,
because first of
how are
all,
you increasing it? How are
first of
you
all,
increasing
Okay,
it
wait,
if
hold
you
on,
illegalizing
get
it.
up
guys.
people off
Guys,
the
really
street?
quick. I'm just
You
gonna
asked
just
me a
chime in really quick.
question.
No, I know. Okay. So what I want to do, just really quick, because sometimes when a nihilist is like talking, yeah, I know there's a lot of interruption, but DeAndre, when you go on a little bit long on some of them, he's like he's gonna have to end up interrupting. So just have a little bit more back and forth, you guys, and have the questions, have the back and forth, and go on. Go, nihilist. Why don't you answer your question and then go back to DeAndre?
Right. So why does illegalizing drugs not decrease the amount of deaths overall? Is because when you push things into in underground, it doesn't make people stop taking drugs. People like taking drugs, and they will always like taking drugs. It will just become part of the illegal underground trade. So again, we had the mafia before when it was prohibition, and now we have drug gangs now. So those cause a majority of black on black and in general gun violence and just violence in general. So there's that, and then of course because we're not regulating drugs because they're all illegal, they get cut with illegal substances and dangerous substances that we could control if we just legalized, taxed, and regulated it. And of course, it's not just that drugs are illegal and that black people are being disproportionately arrested for having drugs. It's also disproportionately to the amount they actually just take drugs. I mean, for example, let's see. This is a little bit tangential, but it's pretty close. A large-scale analysis of nearly 100 million traffic stops conducted across America found that Black and Hispanic drivers' cars are searched more often than white drivers' cars, with less evidence. Black drivers are less likely to be pulled over after sunset when a veil of darkness masks one's race. So, do you think police are more racist during the day when they can see black people and they stop black people more often? Or do you think they're more racist under the cover of night when they can't tell whose race it is?
Have you ever tried to pull somebody over in the middle of the day and assume what color they are before you pull them over, especially going 65 miles an hour on the highway? As I can
Well,
tell you that
statistically,
you're
it
not going to
clearly
be able
makes a
to see it,
difference.
especially considering that the majority of the time, a lot of the cars today have tinted windows. So police
Yeah, so
officers
you're
are doing
using
Okay,
doing a
anecdotes
great
and
Nihilus, now you gotta
stories.
let DeAndre go. All right, go ahead, DeAndre.
police officers are doing a great job of being racist by pulling people over, even though they don't know who they're pulling over. They look at the tag, they clock the radar at their speeding or whatnot, and they pull them over. Now, no one talks about the reasons why a police officer may conduct a search of a black person's vehicle more than they may conduct a search of a white person's vehicle. When you take a look at a lot of these times when we're looking at these videos of black people that have been pulled over by police and they're being abrasive and non-compliant with police officers, they're asked to get out of their car. They're searched a lot more often. I've been pulled over many times, never asked to get out my car. Never has my car been searched because they ask me specific questions about, do I have a weapon? Do I have drugs? Do I have anything? And I tell them everything that they need to know. I tell them if I have a weapon, which I usually have one in my car, I tell them where it's at. I'll pop the trunk, let them see what's there, and that's it. Go about my merry way. At nighttime, they have no way of knowing who you are. But if you're in a violent area, particularly, uh, black people commit more than 54% of all violent crimes in the country. They should be getting pulled over a lot more often if they're the ones that are committing violent crimes. But if you're looking at it on a strictly random number, we have a very small amount of actual criminals that live in the country. So for black people to be disproportionately targeted shows that there's a problem with black people committing crimes. It doesn't show that there's a problem with police officers pulling them over because they don't know who they're pulling over until they pull them over. Unless they're just sitting there watching and waiting to see, oh, there's that Negro sitting over there. Let me wait until he gets close enough for me to pull him over so I can give him a citation.
I mean,
That's not what
apparently what
happened.
they're doing because I mean, you're talking about your personal anecdotes and how like you think it's
I
hard
gave you
to
the number.
profile people through the windows, but we have an analysis of 100 million traffic stops, and it shows that there are racial disparities, even accounting for things like the rate at which black people commit violent crime, which violent crime doesn't even have anything to do with traffic stops. What though that's a very weird correlation you're drawing there. I mean,
The majority
the
of traffic stops are happening in these violent areas.
yeah, and it's not just because it's in violent areas. I mean, take DC for example. The black population of DC is 25% greater than the white population, but black people are 410% more likely to be stopped by the police than white
The
people.
black
How
people
does
in
that make
DC are
sense?
sick. The black population of DC are significantly more violent than the black people that are down here in Mississippi. That much I can tell you. Black people, if you are committing 54% of the violent crime in the country, when you have an encounter rate with the police, if your encounter rate with the police should be significantly higher. I would expect, if I were just looking at the numbers randomly, knowing that we have a limited amount of criminals in the country, not taking into population density and just looking strictly at the numbers, I would be expecting that if they're committing 54% of the crime, that they should be oversampled significantly more than whites are. But yet whites are still pulled over more than they are. They're still arrested more than they are, even though they're committing the majority of the violent crime.
What this you're talking about all these things and but this does not bear out in the statistics. I mean, we
If
have
you
a
have
400 times
54%
we
of the
have a,
crime and you're black, what are the chances of you being pulled over by the police? If you're 54% of the violent crime, you're at a more than 1 in 2 chance of being pulled over by the police that there's going to be black if there's something violent involved in the area. If the majority uh, of traffic stops are happening in violent areas and majority of violent crimes by 54% are perpetrated by black people, then every time a police officer stops a car in a violent area, it is a 1 in 2 chance that it is going to be a black person.
what? A What? You're talking about 54% chance, 54% of violent criminals, and then you're taking that and turning that into drivers, and then you're taking drivers into a 50% chance that the person you stopped becomes black? That what? I mean, when we look at studies, they show that when you stop people, white people are more likely to actually have contraband on them than black people. So if this was the case, that simply sampling more black people would lead to a higher proportion of the correct amount of people being caught, that is just not borne out by the data.
Well, the data shows, if you go to the 2019 FBI statistics data, data shows that when it comes to illegal substances, white people are significantly higher when it comes to their arrest record. When it comes to violence, black people are significantly higher. When it comes to larceny, white people, that's another thing that white people excel in. When it comes to several different factors on the FBI statistics of crime, white people are at the top of almost everything, as they should be. They make up the majority of the population. But when
Yeah,
it comes to
you just
strictly
supported my
violence,
argument.
when it comes to
You just
strictly
supported
violence,
my argument.
they are number two.
Yeah, I'm not talking about violence. Like, why are we stuck on
Violence
violent
already.
crime? I'm talking about drugs and drug stops and traffic stops right now. I mean, you just admitted that white people are more likely to do drugs, and of course, my information here says that white and black Americans admit to using and selling illicit drugs at similar rates, but black people are 3.7 times as likely to be arrested for a marijuana offense as whites, despite similar usage. And again, it's not just because black people are in high crime areas, because even within the same area, black people are more likely to be arrested or to be stopped than white people, despite similar usage rates. The only explanation here is that black people are being profiled for their race. And we haven't
How do
even
you
talked
pro
about what
how do
happens
you
once they
profile
get into the
somebody
criminal
that
justice system.
you can't see until you pull them over?
What? You keep
How do you
referring vaguely to the fact that it's
profile
hard to
them?
see, but the statistics show that once you can see even worse, the disparities decrease, right? When sunset happens, the disparity between races decreases. That's not some coincidence. It means that there was more profiling during the day than there was during the night. So let me ask you again, is it better for the police to profile people during the day, or is it better for people to not profile and to be colorblind during the night? Which one is more racist? Either way,
Police
systemic
are not
racism exists because one of them is worse than the other.
the police are not profiling black people for anything. If anything,
Okay,
so the studies are
so you're
suggesting
just
there was
denying
a study.
all the information that we have here and just saying based on your personal experience that you don't
Oh no, there was a study
you're
by a
just
Harvard
feelings
professor.
over facts. I'm sorry.
There was a study by a Harvard professor. If I can pull up his name, I can't remember his name. There was a study by a Harvard professor who is black. He wanted to prove that black people were being arrested disproportionately to white people. And when he looked at the data, let me find that study real quick. When he looked at the data, he found that black people, well, that police officers were more hesitant to actually pull over and arrest black people than they were white people, largely because they are afraid of what the media would think of them.
I don't can I don't know which one you're talking about. Can you link to me in chat?
That's
I
why
have
I'm
a
looking
question.
for the
I have a
study real
question, you
quick.
guys. Also, something else that after you guys finish this part up, but something else you guys were talking about on Friday was, abortions came up, and then DeAndre, you were talking about how it's like genocide or something with the Planned Parenthoods, and they're killing black babies. Or I don't know if you guys wanted to, because I know Nihilus actually initially wanted to talk about abortion as well, but. I think some of that ties into this. So I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit.
I mean, all I have to say, because this is mostly about systemic racism still, is that if you're complaining about abortions and how apparently black people are being genocided by abortion clinics by going in voluntarily to end their pregnancies, then you shouldn't also be complaining about a bunch of single mothers unable to properly raise their children and get their children through the education system. You have to choose one of them.
My point on on Friday about the Planned Parenthood was not about systemic racism. My point there was proving that the Democrats were the party that was always about it. That was always about the flip. It wasn't about systemic racism, because as it is today, Planned Parenthood, it still offers the same service. It's still put in the same areas. I still contend that Planned Parenthood is there to cause this disparity in Black births, but it's not a eugenics project the same way it was back when it was first conceived.
Okay, so there you are again, abandoning personal responsibility. So there goes that again. So you're not
It's not abandoning
willing.
personal responsibility. Personal responsibility in that particular case would be to not have fucking sex with somebody that you're not willing to have a child with.
Okay, so you want to control what people do. Okay, that's very constitutional. Let's see. So you're
Well,
not
I mean,
willing to
if they're
recognize.
going to control what people do. Now, if I go by the Constitution, our Constitution guarantees us only three things. It guarantees us life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what Planned Parenthood does is completely disregard you the right to two of them.
What? Planned Parenthood. Okay, so you're saying, okay, so you're implying that life is being taken away. What's the other one? Not liberty, because you're taking away
Life has been
choices.
life has been taken away, and the pursuit of happiness has been taken away.
So your pursuit of happiness has been taken away because people chose to not have children.
Your pursuit of
What?
happiness is taken away. It's because people chose to not to not allow you to exist.
What? Not allow you to
If
exist?
they
I mean, that's
if
the
they
default
abort
state.
you,
The
you are
default state
you
is
are
that you don't
dead.
exist. The
If they
default
abort
state
you,
is
you are
you don't
dead.
exist.
So you don't have any rights to pursue happiness if you are aborted.
Yeah, the default state is that you don't exist. I mean, abortions don't happen before, they don't happen after you exist as a person, after
You
you
exist as
achieve
a person
personhood.
the moment that you are conceived, you exist as a person. That's the way science
Again,
works.
this is, we're getting a bit off track here. I mean, I could do it. We could do an abortion debate some other time, and I'd like to do that. But I mean,
Yeah.
at this point, we'd just be sidetracked about abortion. We wouldn't get back to our
Yes.
topic of systemic racism.
But my thing of systemic racism. If I go back here, actually, I pulled up the study here. It was a Harvard economist. Let me see if I can link this
An
here.
economist?
Yes.
You're relying on an economist to talk about a social science issue? That seems like a category error.
You'd be surprised at the amount of data that economists get.
I mean, you seem just fine ignoring all my data. I mean, like, my stats on like Black people being 4 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana despite similar usage. That police are militarized more in Black neighborhoods, even when the crime rates are the same. That Black people
I
are more
argue
likely to
the
be
crime rates
profiled while
are
driving.
definitely
Like, you just ignored all of that
the
using a
crime rates
bunch
are
of
definitely
personal
not the
anecdotes.
same in Black communities as they are in other affluent white communities.
No,
If
no, no. I'm
you
talking
take
about
a look,
adjusting for it. So for white communities
you
and
can't
Black people,
adjust for those types of things. If
what are you
the
talking
majority
about?
of our crimes are happening inside our inner cities. Black people live in the inner cities. You go to Detroit, you go
Wait,
to
do you think
Baltimore.
there are do you think there are no white neighborhoods with crime rates similar to Black neighborhoods?
Yes, you have some,
Okay,
but you go over there.
in those neighborhoods, the police are more militarized in the Black neighborhoods than the white ones,
I
despite
would
same crime
militarize the
rates.
police a lot more in Black neighborhoods than I would in
There's
a white neighborhood,
Despite the
because
same crime rate, that
the
okay, so
data is showing the data is
you're just
showing
racist.
specifically that in Black communities, it's a hell of a lot more violent.
With the
In white
same crime rate.
and yes, with the same crime rate, it's a lot more violent in Black communities. You don't get white population that is over 60% of the United States population having a violent crime record of around 44%, and then only 13, well, actually 12.8% of the population having over 54%.
Okay,
I
so
would
you're
I would put
completely
more
missing my
overwhelming
point
force
because
in
we're
black
already
communities than I
adjusting
would
for
in white
crime rates.
communities.
We're already
You
adjusting for crime rates, but again, we haven't even you haven't even like considered why black people commit so much violence. Most violence, most black on black violence, most violence in general, and most deaths and murders in general are caused because of gang related violence. And gangs smuggle drugs, and drugs are smuggled because of the drug war, pushing them down and making them illegal and making them unregulated and more dangerous. These are all examples of systemic racism. And of course, once
Systemic
we get past the
racism has nothing to
profiling,
do with legalizing drugs. Drugs were legalized in white communities before they were legalized in black communities because white people didn't want their people using drugs.
that
Drugs
doesn't prove
have nothing to
anything.
do with people's choices to go out and commit heinous crimes.
They're not
Now
heinous. They're just
they
crimes
can
because
blame it
we define
they
them
can
as
blame it
crimes.
on it.
They're not. How is
I'm
smoking
not
a joint
talking about
heinous?
I'm not talking about drugs being a heinous crime. I'm talking about the result that you continue to point to, which is the gang violence, the killing, the murder.
Well, the mafia went
You
away after prohibition ended. I mean,
The
there's an
mafia didn't
obvious
go away.
line of reasoning
If
here.
you go to New York, if you go to New York, what was it in the 1990s? The mafia was still there. They didn't go away until after Rudy Giuliani got rid of them in New York, and yet they're still there, but not as big as they were. And the mafia surely didn't go away. They were hunted down by the police in order to get them gone. If you want to get rid of these types of scenarios where you're having excess violence in certain areas, the only way to deal with those is excessive force at the scene. But if you're using that much force, people are going to call you a racist.
Yeah, we've done the drug war for decades and decades, and drugs
I'm
have
not
not
talking about
been
the drug
solved.
war. I'm talking
You
about
just
the
talked
problem
about
in the culture. The drug war has nothing to do with black people being as violent as they are. We can blame it on drugs if we want to, but drugs do not tell you to go out there and attack somebody and kill somebody. Your own personal
no,
choices does that.
drugs do not intrinsically make you attack somebody, but having to rely on illicit activities to make a living does make people more likely to do violent activity. And
Who said
that's
that they had to rely on that?
they're poor. Poor people in general have
Get
to
a
rely
job.
on
If you're poor, go get a job.
you. It's okay. It's not that simple. Over a
It is
large
it
amount,
is that
over
simple.
large
It
demographics,
is
it's
that
simply the
simple.
case.
You have
Wait.
tons of people that are pouring jobs into areas where a lot of these high drug, high crime areas are. They're pouring jobs in there. They're pouring jobs into those areas. People just won't take them.
Okay, so you're making like this like quantitative, like random, like vague gesturing towards jobs being available. The fact remains that in demographics generally, when there is more poverty, there is more crime. And when there's more illegalization of drugs, gangs smuggling those drugs tend to rise up. This is well studied and this is well documented. I feel like we're running in circles here. Do you want to move on? We could talk about what happens once they get into the criminal justice system as well. I mean, I
Well,
have
getting into the criminal justice system is an entirely different thing, and that would be something that we might agree on the getting into the criminal justice system.
Yeah. Okay. So, demographic differences in sentencing. An extensive multivariate regression analysis indicates that black offenders receive 19% longer federal sentences than white male offenders with similar past offenses, socioeconomics background, and more. And when sentencing length instead follows standard guidelines, the adjusted rate basically gets nullified. The disparity gets nullified. So
Yes,
there's
that's something
another.
that I do agree with you on. And then that's as a result of the '94 crime bill.
Yeah, the crime bill was bad, and it was an example
Yeah,
of systemic racism. So
it
you
still
agree with
hasn't
me that
been
systemic
it still hasn't been
racism
taken off
exists?
the books. Yeah, if you're talking strictly about what happens in the criminal justice system, then yes. But there's a big problem with that issue too, is that black people don't have to become a part of the criminal justice system. They don't have to be put into
Any
that predicament.
individual black person can just not commit crimes. But again, over large demographics, there are certain trends which occur, which is that poverty leads to crime, and then drug illegalization and drug gangs leads to crime. This is pretty inarguable.
I'm not saying that doing drugs or having drugs in areas don't lead to crime. I'm saying that no one's telling black people to do that. So that's not racist or
No,
a
wait,
problem with
wait.
systemic
Nobody
racism as
has to
itself.
tell them to do it because this is just a fact of reality, and that
They don't
fact
have
of
to do it.
reality,
It's
combined
not
with our
racist
system,
for them to go for
is
them to get arrested
exacerbating
for
these
that.
differences.
The system may be exacerbating that as far as the criminal justice system when it comes to the 94 crime bill. But what my argument is on strictly on the drug issue is that no one is telling black people that they have to use drugs, regardless of whether or not they're poor or not, or in poverty, or there's drugs within the area or not. It has nothing to do with the choices that black people make. Black people are responsible for their own actions. If they become part of the criminal justice system, then it becomes a problem where you have the 94 crime bill, which still needs to be repealed because it doesn't do anything good. The only good thing about the 94 crime bill, in my opinion, is that it was used to get a lot of bad people off the streets. But that's the only good thing about the 94 crime bill. There should have been more rehabilitation in the crime bill.
Okay, so every time I talk about general demographic trends and large scale issues like this, you revert back to talking about personal responsibility and people making personal decisions and atomizing
It
everything.
comes back
So
to that
your
all the
argument
time.
against this your argument against systemic racism isn't that racism doesn't exist. Your argument is that systems don't exist. That you cannot
The
take
only
large
system that
amounts
you
of
have
data
pointed
and
to
then
that
generalize
has
them because
any
people are technically individuals on the micro
the only
level.
system that you pointed to that has any indication that it may be systemically racist is the criminal justice system, and that's strictly due to the
I talked about
1994 crime
racial
bill.
profiling. I talked about that
Racial
all the
profiling,
time.
I gave you my opinion on racial profiling.
Your
It
opinion
doesn't
is
exist.
incorrect. Your opinion is not going to overwrite all the data that we have right now talking about just the amount of profiling there is, whether it's traffic stops or whether it's just street stops.
If you're in a well, we've already covered that. We've been on that one like 5 different times. My argument on that is that racial profiling can exist because you don't know who you're pulling over until you pull them over.
And yet the disparity still exists. So either 100 million, either a study of 100 million traffic stops is wrong, or you are wrong. I'm. It's a tough one for me.
Or perhaps the study was correct and it just showed that black people were doing a lot more shit that they had no business doing.
No, no,
I mean
we're talking about
it can't
for
just
this
be
for
that
the same
black
crimes,
people,
for the
if they've been
same
pulled
amount of
over
evidence, black people are more likely to be
amount of
taken
evidence for
to
the
be.
same crime, do you have in the data, in the studies, the situations or the circumstances in which they interacted with the police officers? Interaction with the police officer has everything to do with whether or not the police officer will engage in further steps with you.
Yes,
How
so
you
even if
treat
you
them
adjust,
has that.
adjust for the amount of interactions black and white people
I'm
have
not
with the
talking about
police,
just
the
interacting. I'm talking
disparity
about
still
how
exists.
you treat
You can
your
adjust
officer.
for everything, and the disparity still exists. That's why I call it racism. I wouldn't call it that
Not
if there were some other factor
It's
that
not
could explain
racism
things.
if you have people, as I said before, if every video that you go and you look at where someone's getting pulled over by the police and they are black, and you take a look at the video and you see what's happening, they are not complying with the police officer.
I'm not talking about videos. Those are anecdotes. I don't care about anecdotes. I'm looking at the data. I'm looking about the facts, and you're looking at the feelings.
Those aren't feelings. Those are facts. I mean, it's video evidence. When you see how they're actually treated, how police officers are treated, police officers will go the extra step if you do not comply with them. And in our community, particularly the black communities, there's a massive problem with black people, uh, particularly in the inner cities. And now, thanks to some of these other pop culture things like Black Lives Matter and some of these other things that are telling Black people not to comply with police and to immediately start filming them, which can be a whole nother altercation with police officers depending on where you live. As in some places, just being on your phone in a car is against the law in some places in America. And that can cause an entirely different altercation with police officers, that Black people are not willing to have that conversation about what they are doing, that causes them to be searched, that causes them to have more warrants out for their arrest. Just having a good conversation or a good interaction with the police officer, regardless of whether or not you've been pulled over, can change the results of whether or not you actually even get asked to get out of your car.
Okay, so I think we've been on this for a while now. I think we've hashed over all the data or data. I keep switching between the two, so sorry about that.
Do you guys want to get into the Q&A, or do you want to keep going, or?
I mean, I have more stuff.
All right, go ahead, because I don't think we've had questions yet anyway. So if you guys wanted to, if you guys do want to start sending your questions in, so when they are done, we can get to the questions. Also, at the end of the debate on our YouTube channel, in the community section, there will be a poll for every debate, and you guys can vote on who you think won, and we will also list what our judges ruled. So there'll be both. All right, go ahead.
All right, let's talk about housing and lending discrimination. Blacks and Asians in the housing market are shown 18% fewer housing units for sale than similar white clients. And they did this by using pair studies where they changed the race of a tester and nothing else, basically. And they saw how housing agents reacted to that difference. So 18% fewer housing units for sale than similar white clients. Mortgage lending institutions offered Blacks and Hispanics less information regarding loans and housing prices, told them about fewer products, and followed up less than of similar white clients. And recently, this is the COVID PPP loans. Blacks applying for COVID PPP loans were given less information and fewer product offers than whites with similar background and credit. And again, these are all pair tested, which means basically the information and the qualifications between the two candidates are identical, but the race has changed.
I'd like to see the study on the PPP. The other ones could all be accounted for. I wouldn't call them systemically racist, because if you are looking at particular demographics and you're looking at particular areas where certain things are, banks were less likely to lend as a result directly. Thank you for that source. Banks were less likely to lend then due to the housing crisis. So a lot of the times when banks had got into that, they were lending so much money, they were lending to people who were unqualified to be lended to. And that's what caused a lot of the problems. So I don't see that as being a problem. If you have people who are unqualified, they don't need to be receiving those types of loans in the first place. And blacks inside our inner areas, a lot of us, we don't have the credit available. We don't have the sources available. What I mean by sources, I mean references, which is a better word for me to use instead of sources. And a lot of us just don't have the information and wherewithal to know that. Now, I know a couple of people who are Black and are real estate owners and real estate moguls, and they told me a lot about how difficult it is to actually get into that market and get into that sector, and how difficult it is to actually rent in Black areas because of how little information Black people actually know and how little information that we actually provide on these particular forms. I don't think that that's systemically racist. I think that's an education problem in our community, a massive education problem in our community that we need to fix.
Well, yeah, again, that didn't really answer like the results of the study, because again, the only thing different between the two testers that we used for the pair testing trial was that the races were changed. Otherwise, there was no difference. So there was no difference in qualification. Both candidates were equally qualified, yet the white person got better treatment. This is like affirmative action, but for white people, which is like even worse. I don't know. It seems like you're not really answering the question. And again, we can talk about education and how, like, for example, we don't have enough social welfare, which causes people to drop out of school early so that they can earn money. Or we don't have programs keeping Black children in school so that they can finish their education. There are systemic ways we could solve these problems, but we just choose not to.
I'll just take a look at your source there.
Which source?
At the one that you just posted, the link there, the Paycheck Organ Protection Program one. Give me a second. I was just reading over it. Oh dang! What happened? It's making me type. Oh, I guess making me type in my email. Okay, there we go. I got it.
Oh, I looked over your source too. I don't. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there is evidence that Black people are more likely to be shot proportional to the amount of interactions with police. So that's correct, but it doesn't defeat my position. So
Read over that. All right. Well, on the education thing, I do think that will be something fun to talk about probably next. But what I'm saying is that when we're looking at individual areas where we have this type of problem when it comes to lending, and I'm looking here at your source, and I'm seeing that you're having what they use a study of 63 people, 27 out of 63, that's 43%, they're saying. I mean, I don't see that sample size as being large enough to be able to give a sufficient aggregate for the entire population of Black people. And that's only in Washington, D.C. as well, where you probably have a lot more based upon the general stereotype of Black people and the type of area that they're in, or the type of situation it would be, considering DC one of the more violent places that in the country to live in. So I don't think that just going off by the city that they use in that particular study, I don't think it gives us enough information to give that gross general to the rest of the population.
oh, sure. I mean, the sample sizes, they can always be a problem. I don't think there were just 63. I think that was one location of a couple or maybe a few. I'm not completely sure. And again, I mean,
I
this is
haven't
not
read the whole
definitive
thing.
in
I've
any
just
way.
glossed over the first couple paragraphs.
Yeah, this
The
is not definitive in any way. I mean, this is PPP. It happened like last year. Like there's not like a ton of information, but the information we do have is statistically significant. I mean, that basically means that if you have a smaller sample size, you need a large amount of disparity for anybody to conclude that it's statistically significant. And well, the executive summary tells us that it is. I mean, so again, it's not definite proof. We still need more research as to like whether the PPP it like individually is racist. But again, this is part
And
of a broader trend which points in the direction of housing and lending and other forms of discrimination that just so happen to always cut in one direction.
I mean, I had a lot of conversations with a good friend of mine about the PPP when it first started going up, and now he's a Black business owner, multimillionaire, and we had a lot of conversations about trying to get Black people to get started on that, because we had ran into that problem where we had a lot of Black people that were applying for PPP, and they were getting rejected. And it wasn't because of their color of their skin, it was because they didn't provide them with enough information to be able to qualify for the loan. So we set out to try to help some of these younger businesses, since he's much older than I am, but we set out to try to help a lot of these businesses by showing them the proper way of doing these things, showing them how to set up LLCs, how to apply for it in the right way. So in addition to the data that you show, like I said earlier when we started this segment, I think it comes down to particularly in our community, it's an education thing when it comes to that type of stuff. The loans for housing on a larger market, I think that was shown pretty fairly. And in the housing crash in 2008, that you cannot just take off the blinders when you start lending to people. You have to take into consideration where they live, where they live, what their name is, and things like that before you start lending to them. Because a lot of it, particularly Black people, unfortunately, wind up losing their homes during that housing crash simply because they were unqualified buyers and they expanded too many target demographics just for the sake of being able to increase diversity, which I don't think is a good idea. I don't think just increasing diversity just for the sake of doing so ever helps anything. It makes it a lot worse. Now, I will argue your question about it being affirmative action for whites. I think that might be true in some regard, not on the
That's
housing, but
systemic
just
racism.
strictly on the specifically on the PPP, simply because Black people don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that there is a general education gap between blacks and whites on many things, and it would apply to things like loans. But again, like if we're talking about things like loans and mortgages, for example, like my source here says that even mortgage companies were less likely to offer coaching for Black and Hispanic people than white people who were coming to get a mortgage. So I mean, there's ways that companies and racism can actually seep into that as well, right? That's so the education gap is not where it begins. There's systems before that that cause those education gaps that might also be attributed in part to racism.
I think possibly before, not so much today, because today is a completely different beast altogether. If you were to say that maybe 30, 40 years ago, I would be in agreement. Today, not so much, because when it comes to those things, we have the internet. Is we have the greatest source that we can get right at our fingertips for all of the information.
Right. So let's see. I mean, we could also talk about like internet access and people being poor, not having as much internet access, but that's another rabbit hole we can go down. I mean, I can just say for right now that I support building infrastructure to give us all universal internet. That would be pretty pog.
I have no argument against that, but I think we pretty much already have that. If you go to local libraries, a lot of people say that we don't have access to those libraries, but that's not a. I mean, I've been to a lot of neighborhoods and a lot of different areas, and I've never seen uh, a place to where you don't have access to the library. We're not that backwaters. Even down here where I live at, in the middle of nowhere, 45 minutes away from the nearest Walmart, we still have a library that's within walking distance of where I live at. So I think we already kind of have that covered. People just have to get there, and then on top of that, when you take a look into the amount of people that are actually without, I seen the study on that one too. This Someone gave me a study on that one. It was around 987 people that they chose as their sample size, and they only used 987 people and tried to apply that to the entirety of the country without even giving any aggregate data as to where they got these people at, and at where they were, how old they were, looking at the source. And the only place you can find it, I think it was the Brennan Center or something like that. And their source just literally just doesn't have anything to even know how old were the people, where did they live, how close were they to a public library. So I mean, I don't buy that at all. I think we all have a ease of access to that, particularly with these smartphones in our pockets and stuff now.
I mean, sure, you could explore that further. Again, we're getting into more complicated stuff now that the major systemic racism like talking points have been gotten out of the way. Like for example, like let's say that there are libraries around. it's still the case that that a lot of urban neighborhoods, or like a lot of neighborhoods in general, are just unwalkable, and there's like less parks, less ways for people to spend the leisure time that they have. And of course, people who are poor, and just they have less time in general because they're all working all the time. So there's also ways you could like dive down there for a long time. And again, there's a lot of causes for that as well. And then you might attribute some of that to racism as well. I mean, you could go back like farther and farther, but I think
You could go
that's
back further and further, but I think Clarence Thomas pretty much said it best.
oh, Clarence Thomas,
When
yikes.
he did an interview some time ago, pretty much said it best about the public library issue and about the public access to really anything. It's that during the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights marches, they marched so that we had the ability to use that. And so, what the entire thing for him and the people of his generation were that we had to prove ourselves and use those sources that we have. If there's a public library down the road, it was the expectation for us, for Black people, to actually go and use the library, so there wouldn't be a waste of time for us fighting for all the time to get access to the library, for us never to use it. And in the inner cities, particularly where a lot of Black people live at in the urban areas, libraries are right there, but Black people, they're just not interested in it. And again, I think it comes back to the home, comes back to the things that happen at the house. It doesn't have anything to do with racism for why they're not interested in it. It has everything to do with their family structure at the house. You know, if you don't have them involved with, particularly children, I'm talking about, not so much adults. Adults are a different beast altogether. Which, but just with children, if you don't have them involved in something when they get home from school, or when they get, or any type of extracurricular activity, then they will go to the streets and they will find uh, role models from something else, and what they find is never the best thing. So I think,
I'm glad
yeah,
we agree. I mean, I'm glad we agree that it's a good thing that we have public funded libraries, which are, after all, like public learning and education institutions. I'm glad that we agree that we need to keep Black children in the school, and which is where we might differ, in which where I think we should have more funding for social programs and after school programs to give Black children more, and people of all races. Like when I'm talking about Black children,
well,
really this applies to most people in general, but these programs to keep people in school. I mean, again, there are solutions that we have for this, and we just
I
decide
think
not
they
to.
already have it though. That's my thing, is I think that they already have those things. The problem is that Black people just aren't accepting it. We aren't taking it. If I
Uh,
mean it's the same thing. You lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. Black people have more opportunities today to do and get enrolled in anything. There's so many different scholarships that Black people can get just for being Black, just for the color of our skin. There's so much stuff that we can do. You know, I could have went to Harvard just because I'm Black, because they needed to fill in the statistic, and I didn't even have to have good grades. I could have went there with a 2.4. Uh,
that's not true. Come on. It's okay. Affirmative action.
yeah,
It's not.
it
It's
was.
not that extreme. Come on. No.
It was true. I
Affirmative
still
action is
have
usually more or less of a tiebreaker if like two
I
people are
still
close.
have the, I still have the application that they sent me to go to Harvard when I was in high school. And
Wait, did
hell, at
did
the
you
time, my
apply? Did you get accepted
yes, I did, but I never
to
went.
go to to go to
I got
Harvard
accept,
for
I
college?
got a, I received a letter from Brown University and I received a letter from Harvard University. Um, and I never
For
went. Be-
college, or
Yes.
for like a pre-college program?
Went there went there for college. Now Brown was college. Harvard was more the pre-college thing, and then they sent me the pamphlet was about this thick. It was about that thick, and it was all on racial diversity in Harvard. I could have went just because I was Black.
I
I
mean,
didn't
okay,
go
yeah,
because my
I
family
can't,
couldn't
I
afford to
can, I
send
can't,
me.
I can't really particularly speak to your anecdotes. I'm sure, like, I'm sure you experienced them, of course, but again, we're talking about large scale information here, and of
A lot
course,
of times,
it's
no,
not to
it's
say
not.
that Black people.
I will agree with you there. It's not as grandiose as I make it out to be, but it is just being a part of that percentage. You don't have to have the same qualifications. Just as a part of the percentage, they lower the bar so much for us just to get us in there so they can have that percentage.
Yeah, and it's not to say that black people don't have opportunities, or that they don't even have unique opportunities. That it's not to say any of that. It's just to say that, well, these opportunities they may exist, but it doesn't cancel out the fact of all the other ways that I've listed before, and those ways generally outweigh the advantages you might receive for being black. Yeah. Do you have anything else
Warranted.
here, or do you want me to move on to my next talking point?
You can move on.
I mean,
Okay.
unless this is dragging on too long, we can move to question and answer too.
No, if you want to make your last final points, then we'll get to Q&A, because we will be wrapping it up in a little bit. So if you want to do that, you can.
Yeah, I went first last time, so do you want to go first this time?
Wait, first on what?
I guess.
Are we doing closing statements?
No, closing statements will be after the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
So if you had any final points before you wanted to go to the Q&A, because you seemed like you wanted to talk about something else.
I mean, I can keep filibustering and galloping about medicine. Like I can talk about like disparities in medicine and stuff.
Let's just get into the Q&A, and then we'll do closing after that. And we do have some of the questions already. I pulled them up, but if you guys have any other questions, just start typing them in now, and I'll see what I can actually pull up, because not all of them will be available, but I think some of them are. All right, so let's go from Big Papa Fascist. Can you ask a nihilist if he thinks lived experience is more important when talking about racial issues?
When you're dealing, okay, I don't think lived experience is completely useless, but I like to deal with large scale information. So when we're studying it academically or when we're debating it, I prefer that we use empirical data or whatever, instead of having to rely on personal experiences, because those vary person by person. It's generally pretty unreliable.
Okay. Todd, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, nihilist. Why do you think that we're all poor and sell drugs?
I don't think all black people. I don't think all black people are poor and sell drugs. I'm just looking at the broader demographics and the broder information, and these are all generalizations.
Sideways?
Of course, there
hold
are
our gun sideways.
I suppose you don't.
Do you have a study?
It would be. Yeah, I don't.
Nihilist,
You got
I
me
love
there.
you, brother. I love you, brother.
I love
You're
you
always
too.
entertaining.
I love black people.
Right. You love black people.
Oh my God, you are so funny, by the way. Okay, so from Patrick Humes to Dre, can you acknowledge systemic racism exists on some level, and do you understand that systemic racism can exist while also acknowledging that the black community can do better?
I can acknowledge that systemic racism exists if you go specifically towards the criminal justice system of that thing. But I would argue that systemic racism is largely in the reverse today, not as much as it was 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But black people can always do better. The bulk of black people's problems are not from racism. It is from their own choices and how we choose to live in our community.
Okay. So from Juicy Stag for DeAndre, what is your take on the George Floyd situation, the fallout, the Chauvin verdict, the black response, Floyd's legacy?
Floyd's legacy is a legacy of crime. He should never have been held as any type of martyr or hero. And I think the black response to that was completely overblown. Black people are championing this guy off as if he's some type of hero. When if you go look at his report, a guy was arrested and sent to prison for pistol whipping and holding the gunpoint at her stomach, a pregnant woman, after breaking into her own house to try to take drugs. And if they couldn't find drugs, they were going to take money from her. And then in his case, when he gets pulled over in this situation, the body cam is showing that he asked to be taken out of the car and put down. He was banging his head on on the window. That's the reason why his nose was bleeding. His heart was about to blow up from the methamphetamines and fentanyl he had in the system. He had enough to kill an elephant. He was a dead man walking, and it's a shame that black people had to do that. Now, on the trial, on the Chauvin verdict, I'm not a fan of the verdict. I think I've said before, um, and that I think that they should have went with manslaughter, maybe murder 3, but murder 2. There's just not enough intent. I mean, for murder 2, you'd have to go with felonious manslaughter, which you would have to be in the act of doing something illegal to be charged with murder 2. And in Chauvin's case, he wasn't doing anything illegal. So I think murder 3, if I was the one running the case, murder 3 would have been the highest that I would have gone. Though I would have left it at manslaughter.
So from Taj Binjan, for DeAndre, how can you make individual choices outside of an environment? Your arguments ignore environments and strictly focuses on personal choice. Doesn't make sense.
Well, individual choices don't consider the environment that you live in. You can make individual choices regardless of where you live or how much money you make or your education. You don't have to be affluent or live in a good community to make good decisions and make good choices. Being a good person is all it takes to make good choices. I mean, to say that type of thing to me makes it seem as though black people are nothing more than children, and they can't make any decisions for themselves unless someone else is making it for them. Oh, I can't understand why people are constantly holding the bar this low for black people and holding the standard for everybody else way up here. Black people are also here, having us not make our own personal choices or not be reflected based upon the environment that we live in. It's putting us down here. This is something that children are held. I wouldn't even hold my two. I don't have any children, but if I had any, they wouldn't even be at this level. They'd be maybe a notch less. Hell, I probably have them higher.
Your hands.
Sorry.
Were you done, or do you want to keep going?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. All right. So from Big Papa Fascist, can you ask a nihilist if he can name an actual system other than criminal justice he can call systemically racist, and then name what in that system makes it that way?
Okay, so I mean, I can again read down my laundry list. So police, they profile black people. That's bad. So I guess that the police system is racist, and the choices of police officers on a large scale, aggregating all the data, then it systemically it's racist. Demographic differences in the criminal justice system. I think we already went over that. Militarization, we don't read that. Housing and lending discrimination. A lot of the times it's because of individual unconscious biases building up over time to create these disparities. But that doesn't make these systems and necessarily not racist.
Well, I have a
Again,
question too. Sorry, go ahead. I'll ask. Go ahead.
I mean, yeah, you can go ahead. I think I was more or less done.
My question is, I guess for both of you. So, okay, so say that there is no systemic racism, and we've put all the laws in place that would avoid it. When you have a society that is racist, are you still going to get the same outcomes as if we didn't have those laws in place?
Come again?
Okay. So say that we have all the right laws. We do have laws that are supposed to protect people from, for the systems being racist, other than obviously our criminal justice system it just seems like it's just a mess. But are you still like when you have racist people, I mean, are you still going to have the same outcomes whether you have the system that's in place that's racist or the people?
I mean, I think you need both the system to be not racist and the people. I mean, if you were to be able to keep the laws non-racist despite all of the racistness of the population, eventually the amount of diversity will cause people to become less racist over time. So I suppose, like, over time, the system matters more than the individuals, but then it's not a hard and fast rule, and of course, both bad.
DeAndre, you want
No, not at all. Uh, how can you expect to get the same outcome or equal outcome from so many different people? We're closing in on almost 350 million, 380 million people to live in this country. We're closing in on, and you can't expect to get uh, the same outcome from so many different people that are so incredibly diverse in where they live at. I mean, you just take a look at the nature of the world. Right here in the United States, within the Great Plains, the over 98% of all the tornadoes that will happen in the world happen in this one place, and that's just on the earth as a whole. You put that down into the uh, millions of people that are living here, and all of us have different living styles, have unique characteristics about us. It doesn't matter how you change the law. It's not going to change the outcome because people will react in the way that they do.
So are you saying that even if you don't change the law, that like black people would just end up on the bottom anyway?
Unfortunately, so until black people start to change the mindset that we have, black people are not going to get any higher than they are right now. If black people's mindsets don't start changing and start getting away from the things that have kept us down, which is a lot of it happens to be with some of this pop culture icons and stuff that we continue to idolize, the poor choices that we're making, the poor food that we decide to eat. If we don't start moving away from that, nothing's going to change. You have to start at an individual level if you want to see change. You're not going to see change happen because you start banning things out of the system. It's like you pointed out earlier. We banned alcohol, and it didn't stop it from being produced and being sold. It's just not. It just won't happen.
So from Juicy Stag, for a nihilist, will you acknowledge, oh God, black girls are loud. Like, I can't even go to the movies. I don't think this is a serious question. Okay. So from Big Papa Fascist, can you ask a nihilist if having, oh my God, having sex with a dead body is okay because there isn't a victim?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. And then Big Papa Fascist, how much chuck would a woodchuck chuck? Okay. I don't know what
Let
question.
me answer.
Okay.
A chuck with a chuck with a chuck with a chuck with a chuck would.
And I also don't know what question you were talking about, Andrew. They said something about the audience. I don't know what you're talking about. Other than that, I think we might be all caught up, unless you guys have any last questions that you can just type out as fast as you can. I think we're going to go into closing statements and final thoughts. So, Annihilus, you wanted DeAndre to go first on this one?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, DeAndre.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank Annihilus for being so prepared. You had a lot more data than I was prepared to have to actually research in my brain to go over. It's a lot when you're going off the top of the head. Yeah, so on no sleep is a lot when you're going off the top of the brain. I do all my studying from years ago and years of writing and reading through all of this, so I don't have to go back and research a lot of it. But I guess in my closing argument would be that right now in America, when it comes to systematically racist things, I don't think there's a system in America that's racist right now. Martin Luther King told us that once we made it to the top, that's as high as integration is ever going to get. The problem that's facing America right now, as far as race is concerned, or individual people, particularly black people right now, black people in America right now are the most racist demographic in America. We commit the majority of the hate crimes. We commit the majority of the violent crimes. We commit the majority of the murders in the country. And those are problems that are almost exclusive to our community that only we can face. And as Malcolm X once put, that these problems that are in our community, white people can't fix those problems. Black people are the only ones that can solve the problems in our community. And if we don't start doing something right now, we're not going to be here much longer. I mean, our population is steadily declining. We're going down at a rate of about 0.2% every year. And this is coming in from supposed to have been 33% of the country by now, according to studies that were done years ago, before I was even born. So I guess in my final closing, I would just say that if Black people are supposed to get over this racial hurdle, we've got to start doing our homework. We have to start being, I would say, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this about being harsh. Productive members of society. I'll go with that. So we have to start being more productive members of society, because what we've been doing with our community, how we've been completely destroying our community over the past several decades. I mean, it's practically unlivable, where you have Baltimore being the equivalent of a Honduras or an El Salvador, and it's just all Black people that are living in West Baltimore. These are things that are not happening in white neighborhoods. Not saying that white people aren't killing themselves at a high rate too, which they are, but they're not doing it at the same rate that Black people are. We have to stop this. The only way it's going to happen is with education, and personal responsibility, and a change of the choices and lifestyles that we're living.
All right, Nihilus.
All right, so I think for I didn't prepare a closing statement, so that's where I wasn't. Yeah. So I listed out many ways in which, even after adjusting for the individual behavior and individual differences, or the broader demographic differences of Black people, that they are discriminated against in many different ways, whether by the police, by the criminal justice system, by housing and lending discrimination, by I didn't get to medicine or immigration, but there are a myriad of ways that Black people are discriminated against, even when you account for individual differences and demographic differences between Black and white people. I don't think there's ever been a time where individual action has been able to solve a systemic problem. We didn't solve slavery by having a bunch of individual Black people work extra hard to gain their freedom. We went and did the Civil War and freed them all by violent insurrection or whatever. The DeAndre ignores the basic reality that individuals' decisions are often influenced by their environment. And when you look at larger demographic trends, there can only ever be two ways by which there might arise any differences. Either the environment is different or the genetics are different. Presumably, we don't suppose that Black people are genetically inferior, which means the environment Black people live in are inferior, which means racism. Even if you account for things like education of Black people or Black culture, those cultural artifacts and the ways culture arises, those are also predicated on the treatment of Black people as slaves and then as second-class citizens, which contributed to them arriving at this sort of hip-hop culture. So even when you account for culture, there's also racist elements describing the origins of those cultural elements that make Black people sometimes disadvantaged in their own ways, in which a surface level analysis might reveal that simply that they're just making poor choices. It's never that simple. There's always a reason behind it. It's always either environment or genetics. And I disagree with the hypothesis that genetics are inferior, so the environment must be inferior, therefore systemic racism must exist.
I didn't know we were going to tackle the slavery thing. That would have been a fun one to go at with.
Okay.
I tried to stay away from that one.
Okay, well, maybe it could be a topic for another day. And excuse me for all you people. How much chuck would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck woodchuck? Fuck all y'all. All right. Anyways, sorry, that was for the chat.
$20, Don. Pay
Yeah,
up,
excuse me,
Don.
Don.
$20.
Give it all. And I think there was another one. Where was it? He wants to know, can Peter Piper actually pick a pack of pickled peppers? So, can he, Todd?
Pedro Piper can take the pack of pickled peppers.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, thank you guys both for coming on. It was a good debate. And definitely know you guys needed your own time. But yeah, maybe we'll have another topic in the future. Tomorrow night, we have a debate with G. Sneed and Phoenix, and they will be debating immigration and race, and that should be a good one. On Friday, we have a panel. It's going to be a good one. We will be talking about the difference between the Capitol Hill riots versus the summer riots, and we'll talk about the events of the week, but that will be with Synth, Vadim, Big Papa Fascist, and Kyle Frank. So that will be our panel. Saturday night, we have a big debate. It's going to be our first pro-life versus pro-life debate. It will be with Tyler Bluntman and K Fellows. And then Sunday, we also have another debate. So if you guys need to check out the schedule, you should join our Discord. Let me fucking put that in the link again. I need to have this like prepared so I do this. But yeah, I'll put the link in the chat. So if you guys are not, I just passed this. If you guys are not in it, come join it. And other than that, sorry, let me get this one. Other than that, I guess we will see you all tomorrow night at, is it at 9 o'clock? I think it might be at 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
Is it at 9 o'clock? Yeah, all right.
It's
9
9.
o'clock. All right, good. 9 o'clock tomorrow night. See you guys then. Good night, folks.
Deuces.